$1.1 trillion. That's how much the Canadian government spent last year. But where did all this money come from? More importantly, where did this go? With rising taxes, skyrocketing debt, and this looming risk of tariffs on Canadian goods, is Canada's tax system fair or is it broken? We will discuss that and more in today's video, so let's get started. If you are new to this channel, my name is Avjot and I am on a mission to retire 1 million immigrants with $5 million. And as part of that mission, I am launching Grow Nation Startup Bootcamp, where 50 aspiring entrepreneurs will get together in Kitchener on February 22nd and get an exact blueprint of how to launch their first businesses. Check out details of the Grow Nation Bootcamp. The link with all the details about this bootcamp are in the description below. So in today's video, we'll be talking about the sources of revenue for Canada as an economy. We'll then talk about, is Canada too reliant on income taxes? And we'll compare that against USA. And finally, we'll be talking about where is the government spending our money. So first, let's talk about the sources of revenue for Canada. 83% of all federal revenue comes from taxes. That's not a surprise. And I've included taxes, GST, payroll deductions, like EI, and this is only federal revenue. We'll talk about provincial and municipal in a bit because this is not the entirety of all the revenue that, Canada earns from taxes. The biggest portion, of course, is 47%, which is coming from personal income taxes on salaries. That's T4 income. Then we have corporate taxes, like I own a business and, my income would actually come into this $68 billion. So that's 15%. Then 2% comes from non-resident income taxes. Then GST, which is 5%. So federally, GST, let's say in Ontario, you pay 13% HST, but of that 5% goes to federal government, 8% goes to provincial. This is 5% of everything that is collected, which is almost $46 billion, and that makes 10% of their total revenue. Then other taxes and duties, which is about another 4%. Employment insurance premiums, the EI that gets deducted from your paycheck every single month or every single paycheck, that accounts to about 5% of this. And then there is non-tax revenue, and this non-tax revenue, which is 17%, which to my surprise is a lot, if you look at the entire income of federal income. This actually comes from profits from crown corporations like CMHC, Canada Post, CBC, investment income, natural resource loyalties, services, fines, licenses, and they also, half of it is actually borrowing money, right, which is pretty big, for economies to borrow money and go into debt. That can actually be a separate video, whether it's healthy for the economy or not. Of course, it's not, but that's how Canada makes its money. So 83% is made of taxes. Now, that's not all. Like I said, every province makes money in different ways as well. Ontario, I can't talk about every province, but let's talk about the biggest province, which is Ontario and its sources of revenue. $206 billion was the revenue in 2023-2024, and 70% of this is coming from taxes. Again, personal income tax is pretty big, $56 billion coming, and this is on top of the federal income taxes that they collect, right? So this is on top of that. Sales tax, HST, I talked about the 5% and 8%, so 8% makes about $35 billion. Corporation taxes are about $24 billion. Employer health tax, education property tax, Ontario, health premium, gasoline and fuel tax, other taxes. So all of those taxes make about 70% of provincial revenues. And then we have federal funding of about $36 billion. So that comes from the federal government, which is about 18%. And then you have non-tax revenue again of about 12% that comes from LCBO, which is owned by the Ontario government, OLG, which is the lottery, company that we have, fees, penalties, royalties, that actually makes about 12%. I was actually surprised that non-tax revenue and these crown corporations actually make a lot of money for provinces as well as for, for Canada federally. But that's not all. We have more taxes that are collected, which is property tax, because if you own a home, you are paying a property tax, and that goes to municipalities. So that doesn't go to federal budget. That doesn't go to, provinces. That actually go to municipalities, and they develop roads and they, build infrastructure around schools. So all that is their responsibility, and that was almost $92 billion, across everything. So all property tax collection was that. All this to say that we are paying a lot of tax in Canada, and I wanted to break this down for, let's say, a couple who is living in GTA, which is in Ontario, and earning about $150,000 per year of household income, and they own their own home. Let's just break everything down for them. So we are talking about Ontario gross household income. Let's say The couple is earning $75,000 each. Gross household income becomes $150,000, so that's $150,000. Then we have federal tax, so that will be about $17,840. This is both their incomes together, right? So the federal tax will be about $18,000. Then we have provincial tax, which is another $9,000, 6% of their income. CPP and EI. Now, obviously, CPP and EI is something that you get if you lose your job. You get EI from the government, and if you lose, if you retire, then obviously you will get CPP. I actually made an entire video on CPP and OAS as well, so do watch that video if you want to. But that's another deduction of 7% on the entire paycheck for this couple. Then we have HST, and I assume that your HST related expenses. HST is like the tax that is charged on everything that we buy. Like if I buy this remote, I'll be paying a 13% HST. If I buy this, bottle of water, I'll be paying, because it's a packaged good, I'll be paying 13%. There are certain categories which are exempt of HST, but overall, let's assume that this couple has an expense of $4,000, which has HST involved, and 13% on that will be for an entire year about $5,500, which makes for about 4% of their gross income. And then they are obviously paying property tax. Let's assume that they're paying $4,200 per year of property tax. That's about 3%. So after all these taxes and deductions at the federal level, provincial level, and the municipal level, they are left with about 69% of their total income. So they are paying about 31% in taxes. Now, obviously, a lot of this will change if your expenses are different, your incomes are different, but I'm just trying to compare not just Ontario, but I want to compare this with US. Let's do the math, right? Gross household income, let's assume, is the same now. That's not true, and we'll talk about that later. An average couple in California would probably make double $150,000, and yeah, that's just the truth, right? But that's a different problem that Canada has, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But let's assume it's $150,000, just like-to-like comparison. Federal tax is about 12%, which is not very different from the federal tax in Canada. State tax, which is also provincial tax, is about 5%, which is again not very different. Social Security, Medicare, SDI, this is about 9%, which is again $13,000. Then you have HST, and let's assume that again you have the expenses. This couple has expenses of $4,000, and HST in California is about 7%, and that amounts to about $3,730. Again, 2% of their entire gross household income. Then you have property taxes of $5,600. Property taxes are a little bit higher in California. That makes about 4%, and overall they actually keep less. So if this couple was living in California making the same amount of money, they'll actually keep less money after taxes and deductions. Now, of course, you might say that I am comparing Ontario with the wrong state, and people are actually moving to Texas or Florida and all the red states. Let's compare the taxes that this couple will pay if they are earning $150,000. That's a big assumption that I'm taking. And obviously, there are no state taxes in Texas. I don't know if you knew that, but there are no state taxes or equivalent to Canada provincial taxes in Texas. So you pay $0 instead of paying 6%, that you would pay in Ontario. Social Security, Medicare, SDI. Now, you can argue that it's not equivalent to CPP and EI because CPP and EI, you actually get a lot of money if you lose your job, and old age security is actually pretty like equalized for everyone who retires. But yeah, let's just keep that aside for now. HST is a lot lower. It's close to 6% in Texas, so you would pay a lot lower in HST. It's less than half of what you would pay in Ontario. Property taxes are higher in Texas, but obviously you will get the same property for a fraction of the costs that you will get in Ontario. But let's take about $8,000. It's about 1.5 to 1.6% of the property value. So it's pretty high in Texas. And overall, you would keep a lot more, arguably 6% or $6,000 more. Now, I don't know if it's a lot, if it makes significant difference. Obviously, you can fund your, FHSA account. You can fund your TFSA account with the $6,000. So it is, substantial. But eventually you will still end up paying 27% vis-a-vis 31% that you would pay in Ontario. And why look, down south? We can actually compare this with Calgary, and the only difference here will be property taxes will be a little bit lower. HST is a lot lower. HST in Calgary is not 13%, it's 5%, and you would end up with a little bit more, about $4,000 more in your pocket if you are living in Calgary. Now, the reason why I'm making all these comparisons is because, yes, Canada has high taxes, but if you compare it with US and if you make actual comparisons, the difference is at max, if they are making the same income, at max $5,000 to $6,000, which to some people is a lot of money, but it's nowhere close to life-changing money. Now, do not quit this video here and say that, oh, but in US you actually make more money. I'll talk about that, but this is just like-to-like comparison between taxes. Coming back to the revenue sources of Canada, where I said that 83% of federal revenue comes from payroll deductions and taxes. Let's compare this with US. In US, you have property income taxes, payroll taxes, corporate income taxes, other taxes and duties, and other revenue which is non-tax revenue. That's a lot lower than Canada if you look at this. But if you look at what impacts us as people who are working on T4 income, that will be personal taxes, GST, and employment insurance premiums. So we are actually not bothered about the corporate income taxes. Most people are not bothered about other revenue, not bothered about all those things. We're just bothered about these three things, and this makes almost 62%, not 83%, 62% of all of the revenue. But if you look at US, that actually makes about 84%. And of course, payroll taxes, little bit is paid by the employer as well. But it's actually a lot higher as a percentage of total revenue for US versus Canada. So yes, Canada has a lot of taxes, but if I look at the real numbers, I don't see a lot of difference between US and Canada. And now, of course, we are not comparing this with Dubai, which has zero personal taxes, but if you just compare Canada with the US, I think it would be unfair for us to say that in Canada we pay more taxes. We also get a lot of social security, which also we'll talk about in a bit. But the main problem is, the biggest problem if you look at this, these two charts and comparisons, is corporate income taxes. The corporate income taxes, the collection is about 15% in Canada vis-a-vis 9%. That's it, 9% in US. And imagine the number of companies that you have in the US who are generating billions of dollars in revenue. Market caps are over $1 trillion for a minimum of 5 to 7 companies. Still, corporate income taxes make less as a percentage to total revenue than it does for Canada. And that actually encourages a lot of people from Canada, like businesses from Canada, to move their businesses to US, not just because US is 10 times bigger and access to venture capital is a lot higher, but also because the tax structures are a lot more conducive in US.
Yeah, I think we can go lower. And I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm bringing it from 21 to 15, but you have to manufacture your product here, and then you pay 15%. And then I'm going to put tariffs on countries so they can't come in and steal our business, so that our businesses now can be competitive.
Now, Trump on one hand is talking about reducing the corporate taxes even lower. On the other hand, our opposition leader talks about axing the tax, and he's majorly talking about carbon tax. So even as an agenda topic, I don't see our leaders talking about corporate taxes, how reducing corporate taxes would actually encourage entrepreneurs to open more businesses, how that would generate more employment, and how that would fuel the economy like never before. I am not saying carbon tax is just an agenda, because putting a carbon tax actually increases the cost of fuel, transportation, logistics. That increases cost for everything and causes inflation. So I'm with Pierre Poilievre when he says that we need to axe the tax, and carbon tax is not necessarily the best thing for the economy, especially passing it on to the consumer. Definitely not something that is, that's the right thing to do. However, I think we need to have a better dialogue on corporate taxes. Tax is not keeping Canada poor. We have an income problem. When I shared the example between Canada and California, Ontario and California, the biggest differential was not the tax structure. In fact, you would end up paying more deduction than taxes if you're in California. The biggest difference was the income levels in California is a lot higher. If you look at the per capita GDP for the US and the top 5 states, it's over $100,000 for these top 5, and California is actually number 5. The poorest state in the US actually has a per capita GDP of $53,000, which is Mississippi, and Canada is just above that. So yes, we can blame Canada for collecting more taxes, but that's not the only problem that Canada has. Canada has an income problem. The real problem is that our per capita GDP is equivalent to the poorest state in US. That's the bigger problem. I'll give you another stat which is staggering. If you look at the corporate profits for USA in Q3 of 2024, that's the latest number which is available. That's $3.1 trillion. That's the overall, corporate profits that have been reported. In Canada, that's only $105 billion. That's a 30x differential. US is 10x bigger. the differential in corporate profits is 30x. And that is reflective in the top 10 companies in Canada versus the top 10 companies in US. You would see a lot of banks, a lot of, railway, a lot of traditional businesses in the top 10 companies, whereas in US, you would see a lot of tech. In fact, just imagine the 10th biggest company, which is Walmart, that is 3 times bigger than the biggest company in Canada. So I went to Google and searched for most successful Canadian tech companies, and I only got one name which is most popular, which is Shopify. Then it's Descartes. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. OpenText, Constellation Software, CGI. Obviously, we have heard about these companies, but they're nowhere close to the top 10, top 20, top 30 companies in the USA, and that's a big problem for Canada. So Canada does not have a tax problem. They have an income problem, but that's not it. They also have a spending problem. Let's now understand how Canada spends its money. All the tax money that they collect, all the Crown Corporation, everything that they collect, how do they spend it? So 59% of all federal money goes towards Social Security, which is not necessarily bad, but hear me out, right? Social Security includes elderly care, which is OAS, which is important, right? So EI, CCB, that amounts to almost 59% of everything. So everything, almost 60% of everything that is being collected in tax and all the revenue is actually going towards social services. Then we have healthcare, which is 22%. It's arguable that whether it's good or not. Our experience have been decent. We just had a kid, and I was very happy with the services that we got. But again, everyone has their own view on this. National debt interest is about 10% because we have a lot of debt. A lot of countries have that. And I'll not say that whether it's good or bad. We had to take on a lot of debt because of COVID. That actually increased. But yeah, 10% of everything that we earn or spend actually goes towards paying off that interest. Then we have indigenous programs. 11% goes there. Defense and public safety, infrastructure innovation, international assistance. But the biggest one is social services, which is 59%. And if we compare that with the US, they only spend about 21% on social security. And of course, you can argue that the social security in the US is a lot lower than the social security in Canada, but they also do not have an income problem. And, most people, an average person would at least earn double the amount of money that they will earn in Canada. Now, I wanted to go deeper into these social services and what this breaks down into. So liberals have spent a lot more on social services compared to 2014. I'll compare that in a bit. But social services actually includes elderly care, which I'm fine with. 16% of it goes. A lot of retirees in Canada makes sense. The money is going towards their support because they paid into it. You pay into your old age security. Makes sense. Employment insurance, again, you pay into it. And if you lose your job, you get the money. That's amazing. CCB, not opposed to that as well. $26 billion, 6% of their overall spending. Fine. We are a country which thrives on social security. That's amazing. But other social transfers, and I'll break this down. I've written a few things here. I'll break this down a little bit further, is $131 billion. That's 31% of all their spending, not just social services spending. That's, more than half of all their social services spending, but 131 billion. That's a line that they have in their, in their annual statements. Other social transfers, and I had to really go deep into other social transfers and what this actually means. But 10 years ago, when liberals were not in power, that was the entire budget. The entire social services budget was what they have spent in the last year on other social transfers. 130 billion was the total budget, and they only spent about $50 billion, which is also pretty high, but it's still 17% of their spending. Right now, they're spending about 31% of entire spending is going towards other social transfers, and I wanted to understand where is this money going. If you look at the breakdown, overall $125 billion more in spending. Elderly benefits have increased. That's the second biggest increase, which is 24 billion, which makes sense because there are a lot more retirees now. But 81 billion of this 125 billion increase in the social services budget is coming from something which is just one line, other social transfers, which is crazy. So what are these other social services, and where is this 131 billion or the additional 81 billion in other social transfers going to? I could only account for a part of it. If you look at 2023, I could only account for $52 billion of it. Equalization payments are basically, territories who are not able to make enough revenue, some far off territories which are not able to make enough revenue. You have to give equalization services so that they can have the same level of social security in their provinces. Territorial formula financing, again, some of the territories are not as fortunate. There's cold, extreme weather, and they have to take care of their people, and they need some financing. Canada social transfers, housing and homelessness, indigenous community programs. They have very small numbers. Honestly, if you look at 2014, I was still able to account for 70% of all their spending on other social transfers. But in 2023 and 2024, I was only able to account for 40%. So I still don't know where this 81 billion going. Obviously $17 billion, we were able to account for. I'm not going to argue about the $17 billion increase because it's been 10 years and there is a certain amount of inflation attached to this, but I could still not account for $65 billion of this increase. And therefore I did the most obvious thing and asked ChatGPT, can you break this down even further, and where are these social transfers going? And ChatGPT told me affordable housing initiatives and houses are not affordable. Homelessness reduction programs and homelessness has increased. Support for persons with disability, amazing. Early learning and childcare programs, amazing. Post-secondary education support, amazing. And I don't think they spent $64 billion more money on these programs. I am obviously not happy with this explanation from ChatGPT, but I actually went to the sources where ChatGPT was taking the information from, and I was able to find this CSV Excel, which has all the list of all the transfers that are made in the name of social services, and it's very difficult to understand this. If you want, you can actually go there. I'll link this in the description. On the face of it, 31% of all federal spending, these are tax dollars that they took from you and I, is being pushed into one line, which is other social services. And details of it are buried in the fine print. This is absolutely ridiculous, and that's the reason why we need a change. We probably even need something like a DOGE, which is very notorious in the US, but it basically means Department of Government Efficiency, which is trying to find efficiencies that they can find in the budget and save costs. So yes, taxes in Canada are high, but that's not the real problem that Canada has. Canada, in fact, has the same problem that you and I have when it comes to money. We are not making enough of it and we are spending too much, which causes financial struggle. And when I as an individual is struggling financially, I do two things. The first one is look at my spending. Where is every dollar going in my credit cards, in my bank account, and try to find efficiencies and reduce my expenses. And number two, I look at my income and ask myself, how the fuck do I make more money? Exactly what Canada needs to do right now. Audit the book and look at these other social transfers and see if there are any efficiencies to save more money there. And then probably use that money to encourage more entrepreneurs to start businesses, more government-funded startup programs, more access to venture capital, disproportionately higher spending on innovation and technology, and lower the corporate taxes so that businesses don't leave Canada and go to US. Because in a world of AI, we are still relying on banks to fund our economy. What we need is more companies like Shopify, which are proudly Canadian and sell to the world. And I am not here to make companies like Shopify, but I want to make a little contribution to the economy that I get a lot from. And therefore, I'm starting Grow Nation Startup Bootcamp, where, like I said, 50 aspiring entrepreneurs will come together in Kitchener in person, Saturday, February 22nd, 2025, and we'll learn on how to launch our first business. I'll give you my entire blueprint, and if you are wondering who am I to talk about this, I have built 4 businesses. 2 of them have failed completely, and there are a ton of learnings that I would want to share so that you don't have to make the same mistakes. It's a 1-day, full-day bootcamp. The details of that is in the description. Slots will fill pretty quickly because it's only for 50 people. So make sure that you are checking that out. Link is in the description. And my vision is to enable at least 1,000 new businesses in the next 40 years. This will be my life's work, and it starts on February 22nd. That's all I have for today. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में. तब तक के लिए bye bye.